Good evening. My name is Larry McKinley. I'm the chair of the Stayton Planning Commission. And I will be presiding over this.
Oh, you
hearing.
want to do call to order? I'm sorry.
So get ready to call the meeting to order. We'll call the meeting to order and have an introduction of the commission, starting with Dixie.
Dixie Eller.
Get your mics, please.
Oh. Dixie Eller.
Richard Williams.
Peter Bellis.
Student representative.
Lucas Joyce.
And online, is Amy online?
She is. Amy Watts.
Okay, very good. So that is the planning commission. We're calling this meeting to order. And this is a time and place set forth for a public hearing in the matter of land use file number 4-02/24. An application for site review and variances for an addition to an existing state and veterinary hospital at 1308 North First Street, Forest Avenue. The property is zoned commercial general. The hearing is now open. Oregon land use law requires a statement be made to those in attendance that covers certain matters relative to this case. That statement will with all the information required to be presented under ORS 197-797 Leg 5 is printed and available at the back counter. If you have not yet received one of these forms, you should go get one and review it prior to presenting your testimony. If anyone has any questions regarding anything on the statement or objects to it not being read out loud, please raise those questions when it comes to your turn to speak during the hearing. Also at the back counter is the agenda for this evening's meeting, which lays out the order in which people will be called to speak during the public hearing. Planning Commission's rules and procedure for land use public hearings and brochure written to facilitate the participation in the public hearing. You are encouraged to obtain and read a copy of these documents as well. At this time, I would like to ask the audience if there are any objections to the notice that was sent out in this case. Very well. What I will state is that there is a 7-day staff report, requirement for the staff report to be out 7 days in advance. It got issued in 6 days. Are there any objections from anybody in attendance that the staff report came out 6 days instead of 7 days? Hearing none. To the jurisdiction of this body to hear and consider the case, I hear none. Are there any declarations of conflict, interest, ex parte, or bias by any members of this body? I will declare that I was in with Mr. Reynolds here about 2.5 weeks ago with Bougie, but Bougie has no impact on my decisions here tonight. All right. If hearing none, we are now ready for the staff introduction report.
So there was an application for site. There was an application for a site plan review and variance. So this development is, as we know, is an existing the Stayton Veterinarian Hospital, and the applicant owns a total of 5 properties that are in a city block, and is proposing to develop the whole all of the lots. Last summer, they vacated the alleyway, and that was approved. So they essentially own the whole lot. They're going to increase the clinic by 6,005 square feet for a total of, I believe, over 11,000. I don't have the number right offhand. This property is at North First Avenue, Pine Street, and Hollister, and North Second Avenue. And
It's 11,488.
thank you, thank you. So they asked for a variance to a buffer. There's a required 10-foot buffer, I believe, along Pine Street, and they're asking to shorten it to 5 feet. And also the bike parking requirements are 12 parking spaces, and they're asking to lessen them to 7. And the reason given is that there will be less parking spaces, which are needed for the development. So in the findings of fact, the notices were given out to the abutters. In 300 feet around the perimeter of the property. The notice was posted on site. All the agencies as listed were contacted, and we did receive some responses from the Stayton Public Works, which was attached from Ashley Engineering Design, which is the city's consultant city engineer. And they're following approval criteria. And I will just skip to the order. So there are some conditions that the staff suggests that prior to submittal of the site development permit, the applicant shall submit an irrigation plan that meets the requirements. So there was a mention within the plans that there would be automatic irrigation, but the ordinance requires that there be more specific detail to that. We also suggest that there be a revised light plans. There was no mention of how tall they were, so there's a maximum height. And then there were comments from the city engineer about what should be submitted for the site development permit. I will finish with that. I can always come back and fill in other information, but if the applicant is next.
So just for a point of clarification,
Sure.
the buffer you referenced is actually a landscape buffer?
It is a
but
landscape
between the
buffer.
Sidewalk and the property.
Yes.
All right, very good. Just wanted to clarify that. All right. Are there any other questions of staff? Hearing none, then it's the applicant's time. Please state your name, your address, who you represented in the past case. So we can get it on record. Thank you. You need to touch the button, make it green light.
Here.
There
All right,
we go.
thank you. So good evening. Thank you for having us this evening. My name is Laura LaRock. I'm with Udell Engineering and Land Surveying. Joining me today is Andrew Radbag, and he is a civil engineer. We are the applicant's representative. The owner developers are sitting behind me today. So if you have some specific questions, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer those for you. So I'll start with just a brief overview. I know there's a lot of information in this packet, and I hope just the overview will answer any questions you might have. And then after my presentation, I'll turn it over to answer any questions that you have about the development proposal. So thank you, Jennifer, for giving an overview. The development site does consist of an entire city block. This particular piece of property is 6 different units of land that has been proposed to be consolidated into one. That consolidation process is well underway and near to be approved with the county. And prior to replatting the parcels, there was a alleyway that bisected the property north to south. And that alley has been vacated, which just means that land reverts back to private property. Development site is bounded by Pine, 2nd, Hollister, and 1st Avenue. And what is proposed today is a single-story addition. The addition will essentially double the size of the existing clinic. The addition will be a 1-story structure that will be located right next to 2nd Avenue. Closer to East Pine Street, and then go a little bit further over to the west towards Hollister. Included in the proposal is a complete reworking of the site's parking lot and access way. There'll be 2 main access to the site. One will be along the north portion of the property off of Pine, and will be located mid-block. The second proposed access way is near the intersection of East and 2nd. And that will be the secondary point of access. Included in the proposal is an addition of 45 parking spaces, which exceeds the city's standard of 41 spaces. Also included is quite an extensive amount of landscaping. The city standard is 15%, and what's proposed is nearly double that, about 23%. But included in the application, because it is an infill development and we are working around an existing building, there are some modifications to the development code that were requested in association with the application. So the application itself does conform to all of the development code standards, as well as public works design standards, as soon as those final plans are submitted, with 2 variances. So the first variance before you this evening is a request to reduce a 10-foot landscaping buffer along the entirety of First Avenue to 5 feet. The reason behind that variance is that the roadway for First Avenue is not fully to the width requirement for the city. So in association with this development, a portion of private property is being provided to public and dedicated towards the public right of way. So that will bring the street in closer to compliance to the full right of way width along the frontage of the property. By essentially giving up that portion of private property, it reduces the area that we have to provide a landscaping buffer between parking stalls. So when you start to design a site, you have parking stall depths, aisle depths, and then where the existing building is. And it's just really difficult to make all those dimensional standards work without some sort of deviation from the code. So in this case, there will be extensive landscaping that's provided. The total area that will be landscaped happens to be 10 feet. Just only 5 feet of it will be on private property, and the other 5 will be contained into the public right-of-way area in a landscaping strip. So it won't be noticeable from the street, but it is a nuance of the code. The other variance is a request to deviate from the city's standards for bicycle parking. Due to the nature of the business, there's not many clients that come to the veterinary clinic with pets in hand on a bicycle. So the needed parking for this particular use is just not that abundant. We anticipate only the employees of the facility to use bike facilities. And based on some standards that are included in the staff report, usually only 4% of employees commute to a facility by bike. What was proposed was 7. That still well exceeds historical use. So if the commission is so inclined, we'd love a reduction even less than that. What's been used historically is about 4 stalls, and that would be closer in line to about a 10% of the staffing commuting by bike, which still well exceeds 4% that typically does. So we're asking for a deviation for bicycle parking. Why that is because it's costly to add bicycle infrastructure. And when you start to add bicycle racks, they take a certain amount of area around the rack. And when you add up that area, it takes away from site landscaping. So if we're able to decrease the number of required bicycles that we don't anticipate being used, the site can be enhanced even more by landscaping and other pedestrian amenities. So those are the 2 deviations from the code that I'd like to include in the proposal. And then there's about 3 items I'd like to just cover that were included in the city engineer's consultant report, just to add clarity. So when it comes to time for development, there are no questions about what was intended. So on page 4, and you don't have to look these up, I can just give you the overview, but page 4 of the city's civil engineer, it stated that along North First Avenue, there's a requirement for a 46-inch wide curb-to-curb street section and an 8-foot wide curb line sidewalk. What does that mean? You have a little bit wider than normal curb along First Avenue and an 8-foot wide sidewalk that sits right next to that curb. So there's no landscaping distance, it's just set right next to a curb. What exists now is a 5-foot wide sidewalk. Most of that sidewalk is in pretty good shape. It'll probably need a little bit of cleaning after the site work is done. But there's not many modifications along that street frontage that would necessitate removing the entire sidewalk and replacing it with something that is 3 foot wider than what is there currently. Also bringing that sidewalk up to current standard, that sidewalk section would be much wider than what else you would find along First Avenue. So it's not something that's tying into existing infrastructure. What's there currently already matches the streetscape along the Stayton. So on this particular one, because there's not any access ways proposed along that street frontage, and there's really not many changes taking place, we don't feel that there's a reasonable nexus to require a higher level of improvements along that street frontage. So we're asking for a waiver of Public Works Design Standard 312 that requires that wider sidewalk and curb. There's on page 3 of the city's consultant's engineering memo, there's also mentioned that along Second Avenue of the site, that the design standard calls for a 60-foot wide street right of way. So North Second Avenue is currently designed to a 50-foot right of way. City standard would say, based on number of trips on the street, that it needs to be a bit wider. On this particular instance, it's problematic because the existing building sits in the area where the roadway dedication would have to occur. So there's no way that we could conform to this right-of-way standard and provide a 5-foot dedication from this property to conform to that standard due to the placement of the existing building. So when you look up and down North Avenue to the north or south of this property, you're going to have a similar challenge. So single-family dwellings are built block to the north, which would likely prohibit dedication of additional right-of-way width. So again, we're asking for a waiver for that standard.
That was 60 feet.
60 feet total, yeah. And 50 feet exist, and how you get to 60 is that you split the difference. So you take 5 feet from one side and one. Yeah, and then with that, there's a 10-foot wide public utility easement. That's the same reason. We're not going to have public utilities under existing building, and we wouldn't be able to grant that the entire width. So we're asking for a deviation just due to the placement of existing development. And then the last one, there is mention in the city engineer's memo about driveway spacing. So the memo notes that there is a spacing, so there's a required minimum distance from where a driveway can be from street intersection. And standard says that it can't be any less than 50 feet. The proposed access off of North Second is only 29 feet. So that does not quite conform to the 50 feet that's required. We're not able to relocate that access way, again, because of the placement of the existing building. And then we also would have the on-site circulation that's needed. So in lieu of meeting that standard, included in the application submittal is a transportation engineer hired by the developer to review site distance. So they take a look at where you're able to see if you're pulling up with your vehicle to the driveway and looking both sides, and making sure that you can safely navigate, pull out to traffic without having anything blocked at those areas, and as well as the intersection. And it was their conclusion that what was proposed would be sufficient and provide adequate site distances and not cause any safety issues. So we're just asking that the commission acknowledges those standards, but also acknowledges that what's been proposed meets the intent and purpose behind them, which is just safety. And I always try to be brief, and then I get very long-winded on these things. So that does conclude my presentation, but I would love to answer any questions that you might have, or I can add some further detail or clarity.
So are there any questions from the commission?
I do have a couple.
Go ahead.
Is there on-street parking, on Second Avenue where you're talking about that driveway spacing?
There is on-street parking. There's a total of 14 spaces that go around the whole perimeter. So on-street parking would be available south of that proposed access way.
But not north?
Between Hollister and the proposed driveway.
Okay. It's just vehicles sometimes parked are gonna reduce that visibility. You know, as part of the reason for the, the spacing from intersections.
Yeah. In some ways to combat that is just painting, so you can put some yellow curb on there and prohibit parking in certain areas.
And there won't be any obstructed landscaping in that area.
No, on the map, you'll see that the little hash triangles, the city requires what's called a clear vision area,
Okay.
and that limits the height. If there is vegetation, to be kind of ground cover or a tall tree, so you can see out of the car window, not blocked by limbs.
All right. Couple questions that I have. So 5-foot wide sidewalk, how does that meet ADA passage criteria for two wheelchairs meeting coming down that side?
Yeah, I don't know the code offhand, but I believe it's reduced down to. It does meet ADA access, and what's designed on the corner of Pine and First is an ADA, improvement ramp to increase,
That's what I was-
yeah, and then you'll see on site, it requires sidewalks as well that are ADA accessible to a main entrance of the building, and those are all 5 feet, so.
Yeah, we ended up taking on the ADA and the ramps are being built confined for ADA system.
Yeah, yeah, so
Very good.
this will include improvements for ADA.
Very good. All right, so. All right, the only other question I had was, so the access on Second and the access on Pine. And I believe this structure that we're building is to help facilitate a larger animal hospital where they can conduct large animal work instead of doing it in the street. Is it not, Dr. Reynolds? I don't know.
There will be a portion, a garage portion of the building that can access, yes, the answer to the question is yes.
Okay,
But we don't intend to do extensive large animal work. Yeah.
so is there sufficient space with that access pulling in to pull a vehicle with a horse trailer into there? Or
It
that still, that was what I was gonna ask, because currently they are on the street on Second Street.
Right. Yes, yes.
Yeah, so on the site plan, it's labeled C102. Just north to the building, there's actually a labeled pavement area that says truck with concrete. It's a parking pad for a trailer,
Very good.
so that would be off the public street.
Okay, those are the only questions that I had.
The same one I had.
No other questions from the commission?
Can I ask a general question? I noticed the way the parking is set up, that almost all this parking is dead end. And you've got vehicles coming in, was there no way to make a through lane, down to Hollister or something?
Yeah, there wasn't without limiting, so you'd be reducing the number of parking and, kind of the way the stormwater drainage had to occur.
Yeah, and that's what I noticed, based on having to treat surface water runoff for new impervious surface, you've got to create some type of bioswale in there that will take care of that, and that's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did do pedestrian access there, but we weren't able to do.
All right, if there are no further questions from the commission, are there any input or questions from the public? Seeing none. Applicant summary, is there a summary, or did you give us it all in one shot?
I think I did it all in one shot, yeah.
Very good, very good. All right. Staff summary?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, I just wanted to mention, about the waiver, and mention that on page 3, when they talked about, the 60-foot right of way for local streets, they have the ability to obtain a waiver, but usually it's provided by the Public Works Director. That's the same for page 4 on North First Avenue. So they can get a waiver from Public Works Director, and since First Avenue is a Marion County owned road, they would need to get a waiver from them as well. That's all I wanted to mention.
So I guess for a point of clarification from the planning commission standpoint, two things. We have authority to address our requirements for bicycle spaces. And Dylan, we're talking about
Landscape
the
buffer.
landscape buffer. We can take care of that. But Public Works is going to have to address the spacing for access to a local intersection and so forth. Okay. All right. So if there's no other input from staff or from the applicant, we will close this hearing. Hearing is now closed. I'm going to open up for deliberation from commission. Any input? Thoughts?
Sounds straightforward.
All right, from my perspective, I would agree, that was my first thought when I saw the 12 bicycle spots for a veterinary hospital. I know I wouldn't have hauled bougie on a bicycle at 120 pounds. But, and
Yes,
I
thank you.
yeah, I looked at it more from the perspective of employees, and how many employees would ride their bicycles, and it's exactly what you briefed on before. And for the buffer, understanding that the requirement on First Street, and you're dedicating property back, and there'll actually buffer will be there, but they're just, you will only own 5 feet of that buffer, of that 10-foot buffer. So, do we have, closing the discussion, there is no more deliberation, then commission's decision?
Oh,
Is there?
I think you closed the hearing first before the
I did.
deliberation. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
I
I'm
did
sorry.
close the hearing. Close the hearing. So, is there a motion from the commission?
Oh, I move to speak.
Want to go ahead and get your vote? Dixie.
I move the state planning commission with the application, the site plan review and variance of Michael Hammond Star Forest Enterprises.
For the 2 items that we had for you, just was buffer and the bicycle. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're done.
Thank
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Just have a good evening.
You too. Is there any other business for the commission, Jennifer?
No, no, that's
For
it.
this one? Okay. Well, I thank everyone for being here, and that concludes the, what did I say, the 28th of May's Planning Commission.